In October and November of 1831, a number of conferences were held with the elders of the church. We might call them meetings. Here's the minutes of one of them, taken from the Joseph Smith papers, by the way. You can see here, this is a conference held on October 25th, 1831. Interesting is this, names of those ordained to the high priesthood, and see names of people listed there. At this conference on October 25th, 26th of 1831, Joseph makes an interesting remark that provides context for section 67. In the minutes for the meeting, notice down here when Joseph's talking, he said that God had often sealed the heavens because of covetousness in the church. And then look right here, said that the Lord would cut his work short in righteousness and, except the church receive the fullness of the scriptures, that they would yet fall. The fullness of the scriptures could be referring to two things. One of them is the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible that he was working on at the time, but also could be a fullness of the revelations that Joseph Smith was receiving. Because just a few days later, on November 1st of 1831, they're going to meet at the John Johnson home in Hiram, Ohio there, in these upper rooms up here, which was Joseph's revelation and translation room. They're going to hold another meeting. You can see the date here, November 1st, 1831. Here's some of the people present. And then notice this. Oliver Cowdery made a request desiring the mind of the Lord through this conference of elders to know how many copies of the Book of Commandments it was the will of the Lord should be published in the first edition of that work. You guys know that at this time Joseph had received roughly 60-ish revelations. They had them compiled and written down in a manuscript revelation book. And part of bringing forth the fullness of the scriptures was not just the Joseph Smith translation, but also let's publish to the world Joseph Smith's revelations that he has received thus far. Notice the answer, voted that there would be 10,000 copies struck. That is a gigantic print run, by the way. The original first edition run of the Book of Mormon was 5,000 copies. A 10,000 copy print run for a small church in Ohio, that's a huge undertaking. You can see that they intended these revelations to go to all the world. Remember that the church is only a few hundred members big at this time. You'll also see here then the next note is preface received by inspiration. That preface, as we know, is Doctrine and Covenants, section 1, where the Lord gives an introduction to the book of the Doctrine and Covenants. After section 1 is received, however, it's interesting, by the way, because in section 1, verse 24, the Lord says something very interesting. Take a look at this verse in section 1. These commandments, meaning Joseph's revelations, are of me, and were given unto my servants in their weakness, after the manner of their language, that they might come to understanding. It's interesting, jumping back up to here, after receiving section 1, this conference of elders had, quote-unquote, some negative conversation concerning the language used in the revelations. The Lord just said, I gave them after my servant's language so that you guys could understand. But then they're going to be kind of critical of Joseph's language that he had used. And by the way, this concern is very logical as well. Later on, many years later, Emma Smith, reflecting back on Joseph at the time of the translation of the Book of Mormon, said this bluntly, quote, Joseph Smith could neither write nor dictate a coherent and a well-worded letter, end of quote. Only a wife can say that, by the way, about the prophet of the Restoration. Now, she said this to marvel at the words that roll off Joseph Smith's lips as he translated the Book of Mormon, and I would apply it also to the words that came in the revelations of the Doctrine and Covenants. But notice that Joseph himself said this. He had, quote, total darkness of paper, pen, and ink, and a crooked, broken, scattered, and imperfect language. And if you want to see an example of that, just read his 1832 account of the first vision, and you'll see how difficult it is for Joseph to express some things in writing sometimes. Well, because of all this, they have some discussion at the conference, and you're going to see this reflected in section 67. This discussion is what prompts 67 to come. And the Lord's going to issue a challenge in 67 saying, all right, you think that these revelations are imperfect, or that you could express them better, or that these revelations might not be of God, and there's going to be a challenge given by the Lord to write your own revelation and even make it worthy with the least of these. And somewhere in here, our good friend William E. McClellan apparently is one of the people who had voiced concerns over the language used in the Revelations. William E. McLellin, in his own mind, was an educated man. And bear in mind, by the way, he's only been a member of the church for a few short months. He has some audacity to come in as a new member and think that he can express Revelation better than Joseph Smith. Notice what Joseph said in his own words. Quote, William E. McLellin, as the wisest man in his own estimation, I love this phrase, having more learning than sense, I hope that's never said of you and I, endeavored to write a commandment like unto one of the least of the Lord's. As you study section 67, you'll see this tension, this challenge, and ultimately William E. McLellin's attempt to try to make his own revelation, which Joseph later is going to say was an utter miserable failure. Well, let me point out one other contextual thing in 67 that I think is really important. Often when people speak of 67, they talk about it in context of the printing of the Book of Commandments and challenging the language of the Revelation, which I am as well, and it's important. But that's not the whole context of the Revelation. There's one other prevalent theme that you'll see here. Look in verse 3. Ye endeavored to believe that which ye should receive, the blessing which was offered unto you. But behold, verily I say unto you, there were fears in your hearts. This is the reason you did not receive. The question is, what is the blessing? What is that was offered unto these elders? Remember, it was these elders at this conference, these elders who had just been ordained to be high priests. Well, once again, let's go back to the minutes of the conference just preceding this revelation. Brother Joseph Smith is speaking here. This is what he said. He talks about some things. He says here, it's the privilege of every elder to speak of the things of God. And could we all come together with one heart and one mind in perfect faith, the veil might as well be rent today as next week or any other time. In other words, Joseph kind of promised them that if they could come together in prayer and faith and be sanctified to such a degree that, like the brother of Jared in the Book of Mormon, the veil could be split and they would be brought into the Lord's presence and they could behold his face. In 67 in verse 3, when it's saying you didn't receive this promise, that's the promise that they are referring to, and that's supported with verse 10. Notice this, later on in this section, he jumps back to, after the language discussion in the Revelations, again, verily I say unto you, it's your privilege and a promise I give unto you that have been ordained unto this ministry, that inasmuch as you strip yourselves from jealousies and fears and humble yourselves before me, for you're not sufficiently humble, and then you're going to see this promise that was given them in this meeting. The veil shall be rent, and you shall see me and know that I am, not with the carnal, neither the natural mind, but with the spiritual. This bringing people through the veil and into the presence of God is often what the term endowment truly means. Joseph is later going to tell W.W. Phelps that we have been promised great things of the Lord, even an endowment with his very presence. So there's two major contextual things to give you the background of 67. I invite you to bear those in mind as you study the doctrines, the principles, the relative application to you and I today, and what the Lord wanted these elders to know and understand at this time.